Hello, part 3. So, just so you know, I am only one video ahead of you at any given time, because what you hear me read, I myself read for the first time that morning. That's just how I'm playing this. And it took until today for me to realize, you are wildly underqualified for this shit. Let's dive in. Chapter 7. Warlord. The Warlord's face is a living flame. Livid red and jet black run up and down it in spiked patterns, completely covering the skin, flickering tongues of fire in the all-consuming shadows they cast, inscribed upon his flesh in perfect balance. The jagged lines seem too precise to have been placed there by his own hands, but it also seems unlikely that he would have the patience to wait while a droid plunged the needle in over and over again. Some whisper that he was simply born that way, a monstrosity the moment he left the womb. Lending credence to that theory are his eyes. Their irises are a piercing, rotted yellow. When he looks at you, there is something off about those eyes. They don't perceive. Not the way others do. It's impossible to picture him appreciating the beauty of a sunset, or reading the emotions behind a facial tic, or preferring one food to another. If you were to look into the amber irises, you would see something very like a pure being. They are crystalline, hardened into a perfect conduit for one undiluted sensation: hunger. There's a chair set in his meditation chamber, but no one has ever seen him use it. If he sleeps, there's no bed to indicate it. There's only the cold iron of the floor and walls, the ceiling viewport that casts starlight down from above, the shadows that cover everything like an ebony mist, the jagged obsidian formations that line the perimeter, angling upward into the room, serving an unknown purpose, perhaps none at all, and the Warlord, pacing. The black cowl he wears bleeds into the darkness of the room. All that is easily visible are those two yellow eyes, set in the red and black like a pair of lamps. His sense of time is sometimes suspect. He's been known to circle this room for days, uninterrupted, until something reminds him that he's alive. How long he has existed this way is a meaningless question. The past may as well have never been. The future is an eternal stretch away. There is only him, and the present, and the hunger. Everything else is secondary. Section. The two men who stand in front of him are recent units, relatively fresh from the vats. Their irises are still blue crystals, no visible breakdown present, much like his in a way. They stand shoulder to shoulder, staring into the space just behind the Warlord's head. They will not move until ordered. That is their programming. The Warlord speaks as he shifts from foot to foot. His teeth are a ruin, pitted and brown, but still sharp enough for use. "One man," you say. "One man." "One man," he repeats it a few times, as if he's not used to speech, and is trying out the words in his mouth. "One man brought down an entire flagship." "He'd taken over the bridge, sir," one of the guests replies, his eyes moving not one jot. "The senior officer ordered a blitz." He starts to move again from one wall to the other, his eyes never shifting from their target. It produces an impression so overwhelmingly reminiscent of a caged animal that a normal being, conscious of the door sealed behind them, would start to panic. There's a reason only clones have given him his reports for the last several months. "And he took over the bridge. How?" The Warlord's footsteps resound the faintest bit against the deck. Tiny ringing taps, as though he's exerting just enough pressure for others to hear the sound. "He was bound. He was reported unarmed. He is a general, not a warrior." The other clone speaks. "It appears, sir, that the report was an error. He was armed." Slowly, the Warlord raises his gloved hands and lowers his hood. Twists of bone burst through the skin stretched across his skull. Horns. Like an animal's threat display. "With A lightsaber, my lord. The footsteps stop. Yellow eyes fix on the clone who spoke these 2 words. For the first time since the soldiers entered the room, the warlord stands still. A lightsaber. It was the last information received from the Helios prior to "come closer." It's gentle, the way he says it. For an instant, the sharp gems of his eyes soften, clouded by something new. It's nearly as if there were relief flooding in from behind them. With minced, even steps, the clone steps forward. His brother keeps his attention focused squarely on the space behind the warlord's shoulder. The red and black face softens a bit as the unit approaches. Its eyes, still cloudy, drift down as if lost in thought. Almost amiably, a gloved hand rises and rests on the clone's shoulder. They stand there for a moment, warlord and wetwork, each staring into a space somewhere far beyond the other. "Thank you for telling me." A beam of red plasma sprouts from the unit's back. Then it's gone, and he slumps gently to the ground. The eyes swivel to the remaining clone. "Better news, I hope." Section. The one luxury present in the chamber is a holoprojector set in the center of the floor. It emits a near-perfect image and can bounce a signal back and forth across the galaxy within seconds. According to the ship's official blueprints, it doesn't exist. The figure on the other end is inscrutable, though to the warlord, most faces are. There might be some sort of a fatherly affection flickering in its eyes, or undying hatred, or maybe it's just static. The warlord neither understands nor cares. "I take it you've heard the news." Gloved hand rising, the warlord points an accusing finger. "A Jedi! You knew?" The hologram arches an eyebrow, glancing in the... Sorry, my chair keeps making fucking sounds. I wish it was a quiet chair. The hologram arches an eyebrow, glancing in the direction of the chamber's threshold. "And did not see fit to tell you?" "Of course. I trust you only with the information I'm confident won't result in your running off like a mad dog." He is silent at this. He knows his master well enough to know more is coming. "You're an animal. Deadly, yes. Powerful, yes. Cunning, yes. But intelligent, wise, patient? I can trust you to kill a Jedi. Not to keep his identity secret." "Then let me kill him!" "His republic must assume him dead by now." Lips curling into a half smile, the hologram inclines his head. "And you know better." The warlord gestures in the direction of the door. "The Wetworks answer questions." His capacity for stillness past its limit now, he begins to pace. "He crashed the ship, kept its shields up as it came down. It was still trailing hypermatter from the blitz. It punched through. Then had Abaddon is no longer closed to us. There are only cracks. They will need to be widened. Bombs. Then we go in on the ground." The hologram nods. "As foreseen. I leave that in your capable hands." "And the Jedi?" Again, that half-smile plays across the figure's lips. "All good things to those who wait, Lord Maul." And with that, the transmission ceases. Lord Maul walks past 2 bodies, on his way to the door. Section. Republic Archives. The Sith! Widely regarded as nothing more than a bedtime story of evil Jedi meant to scare children, the tales of the Sith have been passed down around campfires for generations. They are said to wear black cloaks and carry blood-red lightsabers,
Some stories even speak of them choking people with their minds. Those who have no goodwill toward the Jedi Order are quick to point out that any so-called good Jedi is just as capable of doing this. Any evidence of a currently existing group meant to antagonize the Jedi Order is basically non-existent. Archaeological finds on the planet Korriban indicate there was once a splinter faction of Jedi bent on galactic domination. But official Republic records insist that this group was wiped out thousands of years ago.
Chapter 8. Marked. I'm pretty sure he saw us. He didn't see us. I'm telling you, this arm isn't designed for proper light touch work. I'm surprised I didn't accidentally punch him trying to lift him off the counter. The woman raised her brown eyebrow. Okay, well, then if he saw us, we'll just have to kill him. Can't let anyone find out about our invaluable pair of... She considered the greasy coil of meat she held, impaled on a piece of cardboard. Womperat sausages, the man supplied, taking a bite of his own with evident relish. I don't know if that's what's actually in them, though. We aren't missing anyone from cans, are we? The woman grimaced, gnawing a hunk from the confection. No. Leave Junkfort Station, he said. See the galaxy, he said. He smiled, the motion stretching the thin scar running down the right side of his face. Hey, with me anywhere's a vacation, right? She rolled her eyes, but he caught the flash of a smile as she turned her head. With a grimace of his own, he flexed the boxy digits that extended where his fingers used to. Electrostat impulses were supposed to simulate a sense of touch, but he was pretty sure the power supply was starting to run down. The fingers were going numb, to the point that he dropped tools half the time when he tried to pick them up. Not that they were the most elegant creation to begin with. The joints could bend, the thumb was opposable, but that was about it. At least he had stopped feeling the old arm. Mostly. Actually, we are missing someone, the woman said. I talked to the old Bothan woman at the well this morning. Looks like her husband finally died from that infected burn. Body's going down the nearest hole later today. He sighed. Not much else to do. This wasn't the first time it had happened in the last month. It wasn't even the first time it happened in the last week. I'll go over later and see if there's anything I can help her with. Like what? The question could have been accusatory, but it just sounded exhausted. Her eyes wandered off across the market. Her camp stove is working fine. No holes in her tent. Sometimes you have to just leave people alone. They walked in silence for a while, easing around passers-by with no general destination in mind. The man finished his sausage and tossed the stick aside. She was right, he supposed. She generally was. But it didn't stop him from getting stir-crazy every time something happened and there was just nothing useful to be done. And even when there was something he could actually touch with his tools, all he got these days was diminishing returns. Like an arm that ran down like a watch battery. The woman rested on a hand on his shoulder. You can't save everyone. After another few seconds' silence. Come on, let's talk about what we're going to do when we get off this rock and go back to taking over the galaxy. He clapped his flesh hand to her own. Well, first thing is to get a proper arm installed. Maybe one of those fancy numbers from the core worlds with skin, you know? He clapped his... She punched the metal hulk. Yeah, which we'll pay for by selling off the loudmouth that this arm belonged to. No, we're not going to do that. The woman's face slipped into a smirk. Hey, Flyboy, you're the dreamer. I'm the financier, okay? It's next on the list. He mock considered. A bath would be nice. Although I'm not sure I need one as much as you do. So we break into one of those Core Worlds apartments and borrow a shower. It's a freebie. And a new ship. Definitely a new ship. Shouldn't be a problem. I have this husband I can sell. She grinned, then swore as a hunk of metal whacked the back of her head. Fwah! Watch it! Sorry. He shot the arm a rueful look. Still getting used to it. Ow. I suppose I could add suing you for battery to the to-do list. That'd probably get me enough money for a new ship. Good luck collecting on it. They kissed. Then, and for a very brief instant, everything was all right. As they pulled apart, the woman clasped his hand and started pulling him toward a corner of the market. Come on, let's get a drink. I don't know that we can count on this thing lifting something full of whiskey. No, not like that. Somewhere legitimate. She pointed at the marble monstrosity that lay across from the fountain. The man stopped walking. There? We can't afford a new arm to end my suffering, and you want us to buy drinks in a tourist trap? I think it's time for another junk fruit special, she said casually, grabbing her hair and twisting it to look a bit more respectable. What do you think? Remember how to do the Nubian prince? Or we still got fake rare coins left. You do realize we're not going to be able to come back to this market ever again once they realize what we've done, right? He gestured broadly at the expansive stalls behind them. That means no more Womp Rant sausages, okay? And no more window shopping for rugs. The woman finished tugging at her hair. Yeah, screw it. The Bothan's dead. We're not. And we've been here for a month. I'd say that calls for a celebration. She smiled and took his mechanical hand. Or have you lost your nerve? The man felt a grin starting at the corner of his mouth. Not on your life. Her smile widened into a grin of its own, and she pulled him toward the neon sign. Let's go then. Section. Obi-Wan stepped over the threshold, sizing up the place. The marble was garish, but he had to admit, tunneling this far into the rock was impressive. None of Hat Abaddon's native stone was visible under the sheets of pristine white. Normally a place like this would have low light to preserve ambience, but perhaps because shadows were so easy to come by everywhere on this planet, the opposite was true here. The inside was lit so brightly that the Jedi had to blink a few times and get mad at the director, J.J. Abrams. He was grateful for the... Sorry, I'm just picturing Len's face. He was grateful for... Not really. He was grateful for the uniform underneath his cloak. It helped him look a bit less out of place among the formal wear that many of the people inside were sporting. But it wasn't tasteful formal wear. This was still a bar in the middle of a bazaar, and, as Cal had said, the clientele looked to be largely rich off-worlders turned tourist. Before he found one of them crazy enough to help him pilot out of here, he needed a drink. The general threw a short nod at the maitre d', along with the tiniest suggestion that perhaps this customer could find his own seat without questions. Striding past the biggest of the tables, which was monopolized by sabak players, he settled himself down at the bar, which seemed to be made of real wood. A spindly droid with at least 6 different arms stood behind the expanse of polished organic matter. Welcome, sir. What can I get you? A Hapes cluster, please, Obi-Wan said. There was a snort from his left. He glanced over to see a not particularly sober-looking man smirking at him. He supposed it wasn't out of the question that the Celestian had deliberately told him the worst drink to order. An excellent choice, sir. Though I must warn you that the cyanoberries usually mixed into that particular drink are toxic to human systems in large quantities. Shall I substitute junaberries? Please. A few sprays of liquid, and a spoonful of berries later, the result was slid across the bar. Obi-Wan raised his eyebrows. The glass was full of an almost neon pink liquid. A single, huge berry sat in the very center. The smaller berries circled around it. At first, the Jedi thought this was just the after effects of it being stirred, but as he held the drink, the spinning persisted. Planets, he supposed, orbiting a star. Hapes cluster. Gingerly, he picked up the glass and put it to his lips. No more deadly than anything else I've done today, he decided, and drank. It was delicious. He nodded appreciatively to the droid, slid some credits across the counter, and shrugged in the direction of his left. If I ever get back, I'll have to see how many bars on Alderaan are run by Celestians. As the rest of the drink slid down his throat, he felt himself going pleasantly numb. Alcohol and the Force, he supposed, had that effect in common. Tempted though he was to order a second one, he restrained himself. His supply of cash was not infinite, and he couldn't afford to get too loose. Setting the drained glass back down on the bar, he did his best to look as though he were simply a bored off-worlder, glancing idly at his surroundings. Slowly, his gaze wandered around the establishment. No way to tell just from looking, he decided approximately 3 seconds later. The place was full of people. none of whom looked more like a rich being with a ship than any other. Instead, he closed his eyes, relaxed, opened himself to the Force, and instantly shot his eyes open again. Somewhere in the back corner. The hell? But there was no way it could have possibly been that strong. What? Cautiously, he extended his perceptions again. It was like being hit by a speeder. There was a Force nexus somewhere in this place, within feet of him, and its power was staggering. Section. It's him. The man's metal index finger indicated someone who had just taken a seat at the bar. What, the guy in the cloak? The woman asked, clearly unimpressed. No, a few seats down, him. She shot him a sideways glance. The swoop biker? Biker? That's not a good idea. The man pointed at himself. Come on, have I picked a bad mark yet? He gave a deliberately exaggerated wink. First time for everything. He just came in with his whole gang. She nodded her head at the sabacc table, where a dozen or so beings covered in leather armor and bristling with various pointy implements were crowding out other newcomers. What are you going to do if they come after us? Shake your dying robot arm at them? The man looked hurt. Hey. Sure, he came in with his whole gang. But he's not the one in charge. He indicated the sabacc table. He's a lackey. They sent him to get drinks for everyone while they went off to gamble, she finished. And if they're gambling, they've got money to burn. Thank you, he said, a boyish grin stretching the scar across his face. So I'm thinking we've got a big old crate of valuable gems stuck in customs back on Coruscant somewhere. So he just needs to give us a couple thousand to bribe the customs officer. 10% of the crate is his once we're off the rock. There was no response. Are you listening? She was not. The woman stared intently at their mark, as he bellowed obscenities at one of the bartenders. A young Twi'lek, she noted. Not a droid. It sounded like the Twi'lek had messed up a drink order, and the biker was complaining that she should have just let the droid bartender make it. In the middle of what appeared to be a profuse apology from the girl, he let his drink slosh out of the glass and into her face. Amber liquid soaked her skin, her hair, her clothes. Even as she mopped at it frantically, the Twi'lek continued to apologize. No, the woman said, in a tone intended to be casual, but shaking just a bit too much for that. The man stopped in the middle of a sentence. Something about making sure to convince the biker they needed cash, not electronic funds. What? No, the customs scam isn't good enough. It's too cheap. He raised his eyebrows and leaned in closer to whisper. Too cheap? 30 seconds ago, you didn't even want to run one on him, and now you want to take him for more? Yep, she said lightly, laying her hands on the tabletop. Let's ruin this asshole's day. We're going to sell him a spice mine. The man asked. He was too surprised to add any inflection to his own voice. The question came out sounding like a droid had asked it. The woman slid around the edge of the booth and stood up. Just follow my lead. We're celebrating. I'm going to go buy a bottle of something fancy. Manon Reserve 38 Vintage, maybe. Okay. The man's eyes widened. He reached out to grab his partner's arm, but the mechanical appendage refused to close its fist. Power cell. No, hang on. Wait. We can't afford a glass of that. Much less a bottle of that. Relax. If this works, we're going to buy a barrel of it. Section. Obi-Wan Kenobi ran his finger around the rim of his empty glass and attempted to surreptitiously look over his shoulder. He had managed to locate the Force Nexus. It was the booth in the corner. One of the few places in this establishment not completely washed out by white light. 2 occupants, he noted. There was a woman, off-white cape of some kind on her shoulders. There was a man, brown fabric, black leather. His perception wasn't precise enough to figure out which one of them was strong in the Force. Not from this distance. He would need to get closer. Or one of them can move, that works, he thought to himself as the woman slid out of the booth. He watched as she leaned in to speak to her companion, and then turned to walk towards the bar. The tattered cape fluttered behind her. Obi-Wan realized he was staring, and quickly turned back toward the remnants of his drink. He watched out of the corner of his eye as the woman approached the bar and ordered something. It was apparent now that she was not the force energy that he had been hit with. That remained in the corner booth. He needed to speak with the man who sat there. Section.
Republic Archives, the Hapes Cluster. The sector of space known as the Hapes Cluster is a massive grouping of star systems located in the inner rim, between Tanab and Onderon. The star systems of the cluster are densely packed, impeding hyperspace navigation. For centuries, the dozens of worlds contained within the Hapes Cluster remained unexplored by the Republic. No ship that entered the cluster ever made it back out. First contact with the Hapans, the cluster's native sentient species, occurred only 40 years ago. The Hapes Consortium, the governing body of the cluster, still remains politically separated from the Republic. The culture of the region is extremely isolationist, and no one has ever seen a Hapan outside of the Hapes Cluster. Though it is now possible to safely travel in and out of the cluster, provided one uses a sufficiently advanced navicomputer, it is still rarely visited by Republic citizens. The underexplored nature of this sector of space has birthed many myths and legends about what is contained within. Beautiful women, endless riches, gorgeous landscapes, and free-flowing alcohol are said to be abundant on the capital world of Hapes. It is considered by many a heavenly paradise locked away among the stars. Those who venture into the cluster still tend not to return. Whether this is by choice is unknown, but it only fuels speculation about what may lay inside the Hapes Cluster.
Chapter 9. Deal. I'm sorry, would you please verify that order? The request sounded as shocked as a six-armed droid bartender's vocabulary could manage. Man in reserve, 38th vintage. The woman in white delivered the request like she was ordering a cheap beer. And you would like the entire bottle? The droid's voice crackled for a moment as it asked. This clearly wasn't a situation it had been programmed to handle. The woman simply nodded. Very well, said the droid. It turned and scuttled toward a door behind the bar.
Lucky night at the tables?
It was the swoop biker, looking at her with something between a leer and genuine curiosity. Hook. Oh no, she said. Her voice took on a much perkier tone as she turned to address him. We're celebrating. The biker's leer was fully subsumed now by inquisitiveness, his eyes sharpening to as intent a state as they were capable of.
Celebrating? Don't seem to be much to celebrate trapped down here like rats.
The woman grinned. My uncle left me a spice mine in his will. Loads of untapped profit just waiting to be mined up. That's why we're down here, you see, so... Frowning, the biker leaned a bit closer.
I don't get it. You've inherited a spice mine, and you decided to come down here?
The droid bartender returned from the back room, gingerly placing the bottle the woman had ordered on the bar. The glass container was fashioned into a double helix spiral, the green liquid inside almost glowing with a soft light. The woman ran her fingers up and down the bottle seductively as she continued her explanation. Well, the problem is, the darn thing didn't come with any mining equipment, so we needed to find some cheap gear, which is why we came here. And sure enough, we just found a guy who's willing to sell us everything we need, so... A stupid smile emerged on the biker's face. Well, that's nice, assuming you make it out of here alive. He snickered. Well, that's life, I suppose, the woman said. So that's why we're celebrating, of course. She added a frown creeping onto her face. There's startup costs. Even cheap mining equipment doesn't go for nothing these days. But we found almost all of the investors we need to get going. We only need one more.
Investors?
The biker asked. He seemed confused as he said the word, as if he wasn't even sure what it meant. Line? Oh, people pitching in money up front to help us get the equipment and jumpstart the mine. Once this is all over, we're going to fly it out of here on our ship and just start digging. We'll pay them back later with the stuff we pull out of the ground, plus extra. A lot extra.
And you said you need one more of these investors?
Said the biker. Sinker. Section. Damn, missed my window, thought Obi-Wan. He'd ordered another Hapes cluster for appearance's sake, but the woman dressed in white had headed back to her booth before the drink was ready. He'd been hoping to catch the man in black alone. The Jedi was glad to see the swirling cocktail arrive. He didn't intend to drink the whole thing. He needed a full glass as a prop, if nothing else. He couldn't go chatting up the couple in the corner with an empty drink. He tossed another handful of credits on the bar. The bartender nodded as it used a free arm to scoop them up. Rising from his seat, he made for the booth, brushing past a crowd of patrons who had been hoping a seat at the bar would free up. A Quarren muttered something at him in a language he didn't understand. Obi-Wan just kept walking, weaving in between the glistening glass tables scattered at random around the bar. His focus was fixed on this swirling galaxy of Force energy. Which is why he didn't notice until the woman resumed her seat that she had brought someone back with her. Blast, Obi-Wan whispered to himself. He diverted his course to an empty table near the corner booth, then tossed a mental suggestion at the approaching waitress as he sat down. Your other guests are more important. The Jedi held the rim of his glass to his lips and directed his gaze toward the corner booth. To an outside observer, he hoped, it would look like he was simply sipping a drink and staring at a wall. He tipped the glass back and allowed a small amount of the alcohol to slide into his mouth. It was too enjoyable to waste the whole thing, after all. He closed his eyes and stretched out with his senses. The cacophony of conversations around him faded into the background. The sounds of the Biff Quartet playing up on stage disappeared. The clatter of glasses behind the bar became non-existent. Soon there was only one thing he could hear. The three humans in the corner booth, sharing a bottle of obscenely expensive alcohol, and discussing some sort of a business venture. Section. Well, you want how much? The biker asked. He sounded vaguely offended. I know, it sounds like a lot, the man in black offered. But think of the payoff. You don't have to do a thing, and in 6 months, you've quintupled your money. Quintupled, the woman in white offered. You'll have 5 times more than you paid us. And you don't have to lift a finger. While the biker's attention was on her partner covertly topped off their potential investor's glass with more of the expensive alcohol. The biker grabbed his glass, took a drink, and attempted to count on his fingers. The woman in white gently took his hand and lowered it to the table. She kept her fingers wrapped around his and held his gaze with her own. I'll save you the trouble. It's 6 months and 45,000 credits. Right now, you just have to give us $9 grand. The biker slowly nodded and reached for his wallet, extracting a small metal card. The man in black grimaced. No, there's a problem, he said. We've worked out a cash discount with the supplier, so... But, to get the discount, we have to pay him by the end of the day tomorrow. So, within a second, the card had snapped back into the wallet. Their potential business partner now looked as though he would be outraged if he weren't so bemused. You want $9 grand in cash right now? The biker asked, drawing out every word to emphasize the absurdity of the request. Who the hell has that kind of money on them? Who would give it to you? I would. The trio turned toward the source of the new voice. It was a human man, bearded, most of his face hidden beneath a brown cloak. I'll be your final investor. The man in black sized up the cloaked guy. A new mark? Something else? You have 9,000 on you? Well, no. But I do have 6,000. I can give it to you now, call it a deposit, and then duck outside to the banking terminal. The cloaked figure's confident smile was just visible beneath the shadow of his hood. How are you going to get the money from the bank, though? Comm lines don't work. They can't connect to your account. First smart thing he said all evening, the man in black thought to himself. This guy better have a good answer. I know the Nemoidian who runs the bank out there. He knows my account balance. Withdrawing a few thousand won't be a problem. And if it is, my 6,000 in cash is better than your 0. He looked back at the woman in white. So, what'll it be? As he spoke, the cloaked man reached down towards his pockets. With a thud, a bag of coins landed on the table in front of the couple. The biker pointed at it. Okay, there's my... Wait, who? Sorry. Sorry, I don't know who's talking. Give me a second. Sorry, guys. Sorry. Sorry, I'm done. Sorry, guys. My bad. With a thud, a bag of coins landed on the table in front of the couple. The biker pointed at it.
There. My 9,000. Do we have a deal?
He extended his hand toward the man in black.
I don't think you should trust this guy. Not offering it all up front. Partners have to trust each other after all.
Indeed they do, the woman said, a very large grin forming on her face. She slid a business card across the table and extended her hand. The biker shook it, then her partner's, then smirked at the cloak figure.
All or nothing, pal.
Oh dear, the thwarted man said flatly. So it would seem. Well, call us in a couple of weeks, the woman told her investor. Assuming this is all over by then, we'll let you know how things are going. The biker nodded, slid the card into a pocket, and turned to walk back to the bar, whistling the tune that the band had played, a half-step off beat. When he was clearly out of view, the woman snatched the coin purse. She and her partner both made to slide out of the booth. If there was a back entrance, they could avoid walking by the gang on their way out. Wait. Section. Obi-Wan picked up his drink and moved toward the booth. The woman seemed leery, but the man in black looked at him with interest. What do you want? The woman whispered. One leg extended from her seat, ready to stand up at a moment's notice. Her hand clenched tightly around the coin purse. I helped you. I was hoping you two could help me. The woman did not move, but her partner settled back into his seat, frowning. Look, we appreciate you applying some pressure to the guy, but you can't just swoop in at the end and ask for a cut like that. He shrugged, looking almost genuinely apologetic. That's just not how we do business. But if you need anything repaired... Obi-Wan shot the man a confused look and shook his head. I hadn't thought to ask for a share. I'll have to come back to that later. No, that's not why I'm here. You two own a ship? You weren't making that bit up? We do, the woman said cautiously. Obi-Wan noticed that she was no longer halfway out of the booth. I'd like to hire you to fly me off-world. The two of them simply stared at him for the better part of 10 seconds. Okay. I don't know if you're trying to be funny, or if this is some sort of an elaborate sort of code, but we have to get going. It's not a joke. Obi-Wan snapped this a bit more harshly than he had intended. He didn't want these two sliding out of the booth again. I'm in urgent need of transport off this planet, and I'm willing to pay whatever it is you require. Courtesy of your Nemoidian banker? The woman asked with a withering expression. Look, we'll buy you a drink and then we're going. The man in black, however, was staring at Obi-Wan. His eyes narrowed. Whatever we require? Price is no object. Anakin, what are you doing? But the man in black simply leaned a bit closer. You have 6,000 in cash? Squirming a little, Obi-Wan hesitated. I have 3,000 in cash. So you're a liar. I'm an exaggerator. And technically you owe me 3,000 for the exaggeration. That comes to 6,000, altogether. Well, technically is not a good word when you're talking business. This came not from the man in black, Anakin, I guess, but from the woman who was suddenly leaning in herself. Why are you even asking us this? Even if we could trust you. Wish we can't. Do you really think we'd be sitting down here in the dark if we could fly away? Obi-Wan considered his next words carefully. He had them interested, but he was going to lose them. But if he was going to lose them, it would be here. At that moment, the cavern began to shake. The bombardment must not have landed very close above them. Glasses rattled and a few patrons glanced up at the ceiling before returning to their drinks and conversation. But Obi-Wan seized it. There, that's my answer. He picked up his drink, took a sip, and continued. I'm from Alderaan. I don't have to tell you what that means. Slowly, the woman nodded. Your home makes the same kind of lasers that are knocking on the door upstairs. Exactly. Now, with the power output of those turbo lasers and the length of time they've been firing, Well, I'm no geologist, but my estimate, the crust will only hold a day or two longer. At the weakest points. In fact, I happen to be aware of a location where it's wearing thin right now. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the cash that he had on him, and slid it across the table toward the two of them. 3,000 in cash, up front. Plus whatever you need when the job's done. If you take me to your ship, we park where I say, and we get out of here as soon as the rocks start coming down. The woman's long, hard stare was still on him, but the emotion behind her eyes had shifted now, from skepticism to intense interest. You got a name, pal? Ben, the Jedi responded, the first syllable to pop into his head. A last name? Do you need it? For the first time, she smiled, though it was rueful. Fair enough. I'm Padme. This is Anakin. Obi-Wan extended both his hands, one in the direction of each. A pleasure to make your... What about everyone else, though? It took Obi-Wan a second to register the question. He shifted his head to look squarely at Anakin, who repeated himself. We can't just take off on our own and not tell anyone. We've got to get as many people out as possible. Why haven't you reported this to someone? The Jedi felt his face flush. Well, Anakin's brows lowered. Obi-Wan could feel his emotions darkening through the Force. Padme put a hand on his shoulder. Anakin? Maybe we should discuss things privately before questioning Ben's motives here. I'd say all your motives could use some questioning. Sorry.
I'd say all your motives could use some questioning.
The trio froze. Obi-Wan broadened his senses and promptly ran into a roiling mass of hostility. He slowly turned his head, saw what was standing behind him, and all of a sudden, he had a very bad feeling about this. Section. Standing behind Ben were approximately a dozen armored beings of various species. They looked stupid and angry, which, in Padme's experience, was the worst sort of person to find in a bar. A human, the leader, or at least the tallest, pushed his way to the front. Padme spotted at least 2 blasters on his belt and some kind of staff on his back. 2 long scars on his face, one from eye to chin, one across his forehead and the bridge of his nose. He grinned, a gesture that reminded her less of a happy person and more of a dog snarling.
Here tell you have done offered Pike here an investment opportunity,
he snarled and jerked a thumb over his shoulder. And there's the mark, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning rage.
Now why would the 3 of you go and do a thing like that?
Anakin spoke. Look, if you guys want to get on the action, that's fine by me, but we're going to have to dilute some
Now we came here to get away for a bit,
his grin widening to display Browning incisors,
which generally means sticking to ourselves and getting drunk and not bothering anyone. But we've been stuck down here longer than a month, and I find myself getting just a little itchy.
He let his hand drop to one of the blasters on his belt.
Know what I mean?
Padme gripped the bottle of whiskey tightly. The glass was slick between her fingers. Can't say that I do. Ben raised his hand, waving it around. Idiot. Look, he said in the most amiable of tones, maybe we can buy all of you a drink. And then several things happened simultaneously. Padme hurled the bottle at the leader's face. Ben ducked out of the way just in time. Anakin launched the table over his head. The mechanical arm's lack of finesse had its uses. The table smashed into several of the bikers with an audible sending them tumbling into the rank behind them. Padme dove from the booth and pelted for the door. Anakin, come on! She put her foot in a puddle of whiskey left over from the bottle, almost fell, and then turned into a slide that sent her flying across the room. She chanced a glance over her shoulder as she hit the entryway. Anakin was charging behind her, their recent uninvited companion right on their heels. Rolling her eyes, Padme veered left, headed for an open space a few dozen yards away. It was still there, thank gods. Their rust bucket of a swoop bike was technically parked illegally, and even though law and order wasn't exactly the Bazaar's first concern, a lot of things seemed to be going wrong right now. Padme! She heard from behind, and whipped around. Anakin was just standing there, several steps behind her, Ben at his side. What about him? What? He gestured frantically at their bearded hanger-on. The swoop won't carry 3! Padme just stood there for a second, unbelieving, and then stared at Anakin with what she hoped was enough force to burn. Damn it! The biggest inanity of a grin broke out on her husband's face.
We'll catch up. Just go.
And with that, he seized Ben by the arm and twisted into a run.
Anakin, earpieces!
Padme shouted as her husband disappeared into the crowd with Ben in tow. A metal arm popped up in the midst of the sea of people. Thumbs up. Padme rolled her eyes as she extracted a small comlink from her pocket and inserted it into her right ear. Swearing a white streak, she jabbed the keys into the lock mechanism and revved the throttle. The bike coughed once, twice, 3 times, then sputtered to life. She roared forward, veering just wide enough to get to avoid spearing a shopkeeper through the chest, and threw a glance behind her. The 2 men were still on the move, with 10 wet, screaming bikers right behind them. As she yanked the control bars back and forth, waving her hands frantically at the crowd, Padme shouted into the air, whipping past her face.
God damn it, Anakin Skywalker!
Section. Obi-Wan did his best to address the young man, hauling him by the wrist, wincing as the mechanical fingers bit harder into his skin. Very gallant of you, but I'd just as soon have taken a beating alone. Who said anything about taking a beating? Anakin replied, pointing ahead. Get ready to jump on. The Jedi's eyes followed to the direction of the finger. It seemed to be aimed at a cluster of swoop bikes. He listened to the shrieks of their pursuers, and was rather sure he knew who those bikes belonged to. He was also rather sure that they seemed to be bolted to the ground with gigantic durasteel locks. Do you have a plan B? Anakin's only response was to keep dragging him forward. As they barreled toward the nearest bike, Obi-Wan saw the younger man raise his flesh hand. Something flitted across his face then. Something that looked a great deal like fear. But before Jedi could analyze this further, his companion made a fist, and the lock fell apart. Anakin swung a leg over the bike. Hope these things still hotwire the same. Obi-Wan looked at the man's flesh hand, then back over his shoulder, maybe 30 feet. With an animal roar, the bike came alive. Anakin whooped. Come on, let's go! What are you waiting for? Let's go! The Jedi groaned, slung his leg across the seat, and wrapped his arm around his companion's waist. To his consternation, he didn't see any nervousness pouring off the man at all. Indeed, he was worryingly close to exhilarated? He watched as the young man popped a communications earpiece into his ear with a grin. This is where the fun begins. As Obi-Wan opened his mouth to reply, his words were swallowed in a cacophony of gunning motor and rushing air. His arms were almost torn from their sockets, and he could swear he could hear Anakin laughing.
Republic Archives. Credits. Intergalactic trade has inevitably given rise to intergalactic currency. The Republic Standard Credit first came into use several thousand years ago on Coruscant. Before its inception, each planet with a unified government had its own currency. As needed, one world's currency was simply exchanged for another at one of several hundred businesses in Coruscant's financial district. These exchange companies eventually formed a galactic currency exchange and began issuing vouchers that were valued against the currency of other worlds. As a measure of expediency, traders began swapping these vouchers instead of using money. Once the Republic government caught wind, they passed a law integrating the currency exchange into the government and forming the official Bank of the Galactic Republic. The Republic Standard Credit was born. Most transactions are handled electronically, although credit coins are commonplace for small purchases and transactions that an individual may not want tracked. Many worlds outside Republic space still accept credits as payment on some level, despite having their own currencies. If an individual winds up stuck on a non-Republic world with only credits in hand, the money can often be unofficially swapped for local currency at a shipping terminal, albeit for a very unfavorable exchange rate.
And that's it. Oh, fine.